How do three normal teenagers go from being best friends to experiencing a horrible crash that may have been murder?
She chose a course of death and destruction that day.
Today we're looking at The Crash, a true crime documentary on Netflix that follows the investigation of a horrific car crash. So without any further ado, let's get into it. In the town of Strongsville, Ohio, very early on the morning of July 31st, 2022, the police officers rushed out to the scene of an absolutely brutal car crash. The vehicle had collided with a brick wall and turned into a heap of scrap metal.
Radio. This car is split in two.
Damn, the view is just horrible. The first responders did everything they could to extract the passengers as quickly as possible, but they already knew it was hopeless for two of them. Only one person, the driver, a 17-year-old girl, looked like she was still breathing. It looked like she survived this horrible accident. But is accident the right word for what happened here? The case immediately blew up online, with everyone offering their theories on what exactly happened. A car drives straight into a brick wall at an insanely high speed, and the driver is the only one to walk away? It's clear to see why people were curious, but what exactly led people to question the truth behind this crash? Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up and learn a little about the unfortunate victims of this crash. Three teenagers, all of whom were in the same high school class, and who had all graduated just weeks before this horrific tragedy. They were Mackenzie Shrilla, who was the driver, her boyfriend Dominic Russo, and their friend Davion Flanagan. Mackenzie's life was heavily documented on her social media accounts prior to the crash. She looked like a typical fun-loving American teenager who loved to wear Chanel earrings.
We're gonna start doing something new on here, and it is food review.
Mackenzie, Dom, and Davion were part of a tight-knit friend group that also included Rosie and Rosie's boyfriend Bubba, who were both interviewed for this documentary. According to Rosie and Bubba, the five of them were as tight as any group of friends could be. They would hang out almost every day, making each other laugh, like kids their age should. Davion was a lovable goofball who was always cracking jokes. Dom was a young entrepreneur dabbling in cryptocurrency and his own clothing line. Mackenzie and Dom have been dating for the last 4 years, and everyone agreed they were pretty much couple goals. Is it really even possible that Mackenzie would do something to intentionally hurt her closest friends? Back at the scene of the crash, police officers find drugs, mushrooms, and marijuana among the teenagers' belongings. There's also something here that the documentary fails to mention. Mackenzie was wearing her seatbelt, but the other two boys were not. Then, in some absolutely heartbreaking body cam footage, we see the very moment officers tell Mackenzie's parents that the two boys died in the crash.
Two are deceased in the vehicle. Daughter's driving. Who died?
As the parents of Dom and Davion find out about this, they want answers. Was Mackenzie driving under the influence of drugs? Was she distracted or sleeping at the wheel? Friends and classmates from all over the Strongsville community gathered at the scene of the crash to hold a vigil. Davion was a football player at their high school along with Bubba, beloved by many who came out to show their love and support. While everyone mourned the two boys, their families struggled to deal with their grief and their questions. Next, we meet Tim Troop, the prosecutor in the case brought against Mackenzie. As he looked through all the evidence from the crash, he tried to determine whether it was just a tragic accident or something deeper. The police visited Mackenzie in the hospital the day after the crash. She had suffered a broken leg, broken ribs, and separated shoulder, as well as artery and organ damage. Mackenzie wasn't in a state to answer questions, but Mackenzie's parents gave the police her phone to look through. On the surface, everything between Mackenzie and Dom seemed perfect. Dom was 3 years older and already had his own place. Mackenzie's parents were even supportive of her moving in with her boyfriend after graduation, despite only being 17. Dom had money, but more importantly, they seemed to truly love each other. He showered Mackenzie with gifts all the time, and their parents believed the teenagers would get married very shortly. When Mackenzie was finally aware enough to understand that her boyfriend had tragically died in the crash, she was inconsolable. When she was finally able to talk to police, she told them that she could barely remember the morning of the accident. She remembered waking up and getting in the car, but everything after that is a blank. The timing of this memory loss seemed a little too convenient for some of the investigators. 2 days after the crash, some friends of Davion visited the police station with important information. They had an app linked to Davion's phone that allowed them to track his every move before the crash. The police learned that the night before the crash, Mackenzie, Dom, and Davion had been going to multiple graduation parties where there were drugs present. And on Mackenzie's phone, there were many videos of her smoking marijuana. The police even uncovered an earlier video of Mackenzie smoking marijuana while driving. so driving under the influence of drugs wasn't out of the question here. The police sent Mackenzie's blood to a lab out of state to test for drugs and awaited the results. In the meantime, the police looked deeper into the graduation parties that the teens had visited. Rosie refused to talk to the police, feeling like they had already made up their minds that their friends were drug users who were completely responsible for the crash. But in the interview for this documentary, Rosie insists that the graduation party was really just a chill sleepover among a close few friends. According to her, they never even took the shrooms. Bubba says that Mackenzie didn't smoke either. She was on a smoke break after recently coughing up black mucus from smoking too much. Yeah, good call. When Mackenzie, Dom, and Davion left the house at 5:30 a.m. that fateful morning, Rosie and Bubba point out that everything seemed completely normal. CCTV footage leading up to the crash shows that Mackenzie was speeding down a long, straight road at nearly 100 miles an hour. When she drove by a T intersection, she didn't slow down in the slightest and slammed straight into that brick wall. Be aware, this footage isn't graphic, but it's still really hard to watch. Man, those poor kids. When the lab results come in, there were traces of marijuana found in Mackenzie's system, which was no surprise, but no mushrooms or alcohol. It's unlikely that marijuana alone would have caused Mackenzie to start speeding out of control, especially since she was so habitual of it. So, if she wasn't driving under the influence, then what happened? Weeks went by, and the community still reeled from the tragedy and lack of answers. One day, Davion's father, Scott, sees something surprising on Instagram. Shortly after the crash, a fashion brand reached out to Mackenzie and asked if she wanted to work with them as a model/influencer. In the response comments from Mackenzie and her mom, they acknowledged the crash and how hard it is on Mackenzie, but the 17-year-old girl said she would be thrilled to work with the brand. She even specifies that she has been emailing them for a long time. Now, everybody grieves in their own way, but it is definitely a strange response from someone who just went through such a traumatic event with so many lingering questions. Davion's younger sister, Divine, went to the same school as Mackenzie and her friends, and she has a different view of Mackenzie. According to Divine, Mackenzie had a real reputation as a mean girl around school. Other students would avoid her because of her bullying and aggressive behavior. She got in trouble in class frequently, and according to prosecutor Tim, her parents were responsible for failing to ever discipline their daughter's poor behavior. Side note, Mackenzie's father was also seen wearing a strangely goofy shirt for this documentary, a surprising choice given that he's defending his daughter from such serious accusations. Anyway, right as this picture is coming into focus, the forensic report on Mackenzie's vehicle comes back, and it shows that the car was working perfectly. There was no reason for this crash to happen, aside from Mackenzie herself. The police are even able to determine that in the seconds just before the crash, Mackenzie was definitely and intentionally accelerating the vehicle as much as possible. She made no attempt to hit the brakes. There was some slight swerving and movement in the gear shift, but that was likely from Dom and Davion desperately trying to save their own lives. The police continued to interview friends of the victims in search of the truth, and soon enough, some of Dom's friends started to paint a different picture of Mackenzie and Dom's relationship. According to them, Mackenzie could be very controlling and even threatening towards Dom. Some of his friends even felt like he was trapped under her spell, stuck in a relationship that wasn't any good for him. They fought frequently, and Dom even cheated on Mackenzie at some point, which made things even more volatile between them. Rosie and Bubba defend their friend's relationship and say they were just going through typical couple problems, and it's hard to know what the exact truth is. Time continues to pass, and people start to take sides. Dominic's dad and his sisters stayed close with Mackenzie's family, frequently visiting the memorial site and supporting each other through this hard time. But Davion's family and Dominic's mother felt like Mackenzie was responsible and kept their distance from her as much as possible. In September, Dominic's brother, Angelo, was interviewed by the police, and Angelo told them that Dominic actively wanted to break up with Mackenzie leading up to the crash. Mackenzie would threaten Dom whenever he tried to leave her, but Dom was planning to officially end things with her that summer. In text messages between the couple, Mackenzie said to Dom, "Watch your back," and "your life." 2 weeks before the crash, there was a similar incident of Mackenzie driving dangerously with Dominic in the car. Dom called his mother, and she sent her friend Chris to make sure everything was okay. Chris heard Mackenzie over the phone while this was happening, and she threatened, out loud, to crash the car while Dominic was in it. Not a great look for her right now. The evidence was starting to pile up, indicating that there was no other explanation besides Mackenzie crashing the car intentionally. Soon after this, the police pulled over Mackenzie's family while they were returning from physical therapy and placed Mackenzie under arrest. While the officers were handcuffing her, Mackenzie urged them to be careful with her bracelets.
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet, please?
You got it.
This clip of hers leads a lot of people to believe that she was shallow. However, Rosie mentioned that these bracelets were a gift by Dominic, and that's why she was protective of them. Mackenzie was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder. Bubba and Rosie defend Mackenzie to this day, but the community and social media quickly turned on the teenage girl. Her trial was set for 2 years later, where she would be tried as an adult. Then, the documentary gives us an interview with Mackenzie herself. She expresses true remorse about the boys' deaths and says that Dominic was absolutely the love of her life. She says she never got very angry with Dom during their arguments, and she felt nothing but love for her friend Davion. When the interviewer asks her about the morning of the crash, she once again insists that she doesn't remember a single thing that happened after getting in that car. She admits that the accident was her fault, but denies that she possibly could have done it on purpose. In 2023, the trial began. Mackenzie chose to have a bench trial, meaning it would be decided by a judge instead of a full jury. Mackenzie's supporters thought it would be ridiculous that they could possibly find her guilty for what was clearly a tragedy, and her lawyer insisted that there was no evidence pointing to her guilt. The prosecution used all the evidence they had to explain that Mackenzie was fully aware of her actions that morning. She never even tried to use the brakes, and there was nothing in her system that would potentially cause a mental break. The defense used the argument that if Mackenzie did this on purpose, she wouldn't have been putting her own life in serious danger, and there's no evidence that she was suicidal. But after all of this, another picture comes into view. Mackenzie says that the most likely explanation was that she had a medical episode where she briefly blacked out and lost control of her body. The defense brought this up and showed that Mackenzie had been diagnosed with a condition called POTS that can cause blackouts. However, the prosecution countered by saying that if she had such a dangerous condition, she shouldn't have been driving in the first place. Prosecutor Tim doubts that the diagnosis is even entirely real. Blacking out wouldn't explain why Mackenzie's foot was so firmly slammed on the gas pedal. Also, one thing this documentary leaves out is that there is another important piece of evidence, a recording of Mackenzie and her mother after the crash. It's difficult to make out, but it sounds like Mackenzie is asking her mother, "Can we just tell the police I had a seizure?" Pretty suspicious. Back with the trial, Dominic's mother shared a video in the trial from just a bit before the crash. It was recorded by Dominic, and it showed Mackenzie threatening and cursing at Dom, who had locked Mackenzie out of his house. At this point, even Dominic's dad and sister, who had been supportive of Mackenzie, started to have doubts. Everyone in that courtroom started to see a different side of this girl, one capable of doing something so impulsive and horrifying. Tim drove the prosecution's case home in their closing argument and emphasized Davion's role in everything. Tim said that Davion had absolutely nothing to do with Mackenzie and Dom's relationship problems, and that the fact that she crashed the car with him inside shows a complete disregard for human life. Another piece of evidence absent from the Netflix documentary is that prior to the crash, GPS data shows Mackenzie had been driving the same route multiple times. The route she took leading up to that crash. Prosecution used this to argue that Mackenzie had been planning this for days at least. After this, the judge's verdict came swiftly. The judge completely agreed with the prosecution's interpretation of events and found Mackenzie guilty on both counts of murder. The sentence was supposed to be between 15 years to life in prison for this kind of crime. The families of the 2 boys argued that the court should give Mackenzie the longest sentence possible, and Mackenzie made an apology in front of the court, but it wasn't enough to sway the judge.
That was the worst apology I think I've ever heard in my life.
Tim showed photos of Mackenzie just 3 months after the crash, where she dressed up as a corpse for Halloween. But Mackenzie and Rosie say that they were dressed like Playboy Cardi, an artist that Dominic loved, as an homage to him. The families of the victims, however, found it distasteful. Divine's speech requesting for Mackenzie to get the max sentence was the final nail in the coffin. Mackenzie was given 15 years to life for each count of murder. There's a chance she could be out on parole in 15 years, but it's also possible she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. Mackenzie's legal team has tried to appeal the decision multiple times, but they never succeeded. She still resides inside the prison in Ohio, regretting the worst day of her entire life. Whatever you may think of her, there's no denying this is an absolute tragedy that should never have been allowed to happen. While going through this documentary, it was very evident that Mackenzie's parents never learned how to say no to her, and that might have caused some behavioral problems in her. In the end, Mackenzie expresses remorse to Davion, Dominic, and their families. The boys' families believe she is still being dishonest about not remembering the crash, and wish she would tell the truth so that they could get closure. Mackenzie's parents still believe their daughter is entirely innocent, and if anything, Dominic was the unstable one. They are hopeful that someday they will get their daughter out through an online movement to free Kenzie. Scott hopes that Mackenzie's parents will learn their lesson and stop coddling their daughter no matter what she does. But, in good news, a scholarship has been created in Davion's name. After an injury prevented him from playing football anymore, Davion found a new dream, going to barber school. Now the Davion Flanagan Scholarship helps other kids afford tuition at barber school, so that his legacy can help others achieve the dreams he never could. Damn, it's a heartbreaking story. I'm gonna go take a walk. Click one of these links to check out another one of my videos, and I will see you soon.